All I've got is I want to talk about Ilhan Omar, about Tucker Carlson, and I've got kind of an angle on this mosque shooting.
Okay. This is going to be really weird because I don't know what you're talking about now.
The mosque shooting? The New Zealand thing?
Yeah,
you haven't looked into it at all?
I don't know about anything that you just talked about because I haven't been on Twitter. But that's actually okay because you can tell me and then I can figure out from my ignorant perspective.
It's kind of horrifying. This alt-right skinhead dude posted this manifesto on 8chan about like birth rates and all this shit. He said he's finally going to do something about it. And so he goes into a mosque and he live streams it on a GoPro shit. On his head. And there's like a 10, 15 minute video out there of him just gunning down like 50 people in first person.
Did you read the manifesto?
A little bit. It's very long.
Okay. So it's like, is it like Unabomber level?
It's about what you'd expect from just some crazy dude on 4chan who's concerned about birth rates and immigration and shit.
Sure. It's not like they happen all the time. But when things like this happen, I'm always curious to read the manifesto because it's like, to me, it's especially interesting if the manifesto actually is like coherent.
Yeah.
Because in my brain, I would imagine if somebody does something so crazy, obviously it's just going to be incoherent, like Time Cube, like ramblings. Yeah. But then every now and then, like the Unabombers made total sense.
Yeah.
So it's just strange that sometimes you can have that duality in someone, or like,
or
I guess the stranger thing is that something that like an ideology or a mindset that seems to make sense when explained, then like the logical consequence of somebody's behavior as a result of those beliefs is completely beyond the pale.
Yeah, the discussion has largely been centered around how it's not beyond the pale for the groups and the communities that this person was following. And even now, you can go on the poll board on 4chan, and there's people who are like super happy about this, and they're like celebrating the deaths, and they think, oh, he should have killed more people, and all this shit.
Right. That is pretty crazy though, because so I did actually hear. So okay, just to give the background a little bit here, I guess we've started the show.
We might.
Hey, welcome to the show. Yeah. But sure, just to give the background, I have been kind of disconnected from the internet for a little while. So like I haven't been on Twitter at all for the last few weeks. I've kind of been on Reddit, but I never go to default subs or main subs. I'll just like sometimes, like Google a question, I'll look up something in particular, but I'm not, browsing. And then same with YouTube and everything else. And so the only way that I have heard anything is from big podcasts. So like I'll sort of skip on most podcasts, but listen to my favorite ones. I guess this never got brought up on the big ones.
Yeah, I haven't seen any. Like I follow NPR's news podcast and 538's news podcast, a couple others. Nobody's really put something up yet, as far as I can tell.
So this was fresh? It was just a couple days ago?
Yeah.
Or? Okay. Yeah, and then I did see somebody on Facebook, one of my friends who's a Kiwi, he's from New Zealand. Mm-hmm. He posted something about bigotry and how he's cut ties with some of his friends over like saying anti-Muslim jokes or something. And I assumed that was in response to something, but I couldn't really tell because he didn't talk about the thing in particular. He just said, Islamophobia is disgusting and like I won't tolerate it in my friends.
Yeah, there's a lot of drama over there right now. One of the I don't know if he's like a senator, but there's a politician. I don't know how their political system works, but there's a New Zealand politician who immediately after the attack released a statement basically saying, what this attack really highlights is the growing concern over immigration in this country, and that's what we should be focusing on after this. So I think that's really split a lot of their it's causing it's stoking some of the division that we're familiar with in the United States.
So this was like a right-wing politician?
Yeah, and he consequently got egged at a I don't know, he was doing some kind of speech or like he was just talking to reporters, and like some 17-year-old came behind him and egged him in the head.
It's kind of hilarious how juvenile that is, like compared to there's like a shooting, and then the response to the comments is like an egging.
Yeah,
it's like such a mild response. Okay, well, that's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't, unfortunately, I hadn't really followed that stuff at all. And I'm going to assume that, you mentioned Ilhan Omar. I assume that she talks about this or has.
I haven't seen anything. I mean, I haven't like read every politician's, tweet response. I assume she said something, but I don't know.
Okay, so you want to bring up something totally different.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to talk about Ilhan Omar's, quote, anti-Semitic comments.
Oh, okay. So that's sort of an
ongoing
story, I guess. Okay, cool. And I forgot, I don't know, did I mention to you about the recent Rubin report?
No.
There's a Rubin report from like 3 days ago or something that I thought was really good. There's this guy, his name is escaping me. I think it was Robert Barnes, and he went on and he was a lawyer, like a civil lawyer, who I guess has specialized in various amounts of free speech or libel or slander cases, and especially civil cases. So the entire purpose of that interview was kind of to talk about social media censorship and the same sort of things that Tim and Jack were talking about, except he was a lawyer and he was able to talk to it. So in my personal opinion, Tim didn't do a very good job on that interview with Rogan and Jack.
Yeah.
And I thought that this guy was actually really, really good, and I had wished that Rogan would talk to him instead, or that he could have a conversation with Jack. I thought he did a much better job of sort of articulating in a more rigorous and legal sense what sort of responsibilities Twitter has and how it should be regulated and all this other stuff. But
do you have an example of like a specific argument that he made?
Yeah, so like for instance, he really digs into, so Tim's thing is Tim would just find a bunch of anecdotes about conservatives being censored and kind of throw them out, and then Jack and his team, they would sort of respond to each individual anecdote and then explain like, oh, well, it totally depends, because in this case we have this reasoning, in this other case here's our reasoning. But this guy Barnes, I think his name was Barnes, he had a lot more so I'll give a specific example. Twitter in the past and a few of the big media companies had regulatory conflict in terms of whether or not they are classified as publishers.
Yeah.
And so this is the big thing that came up with Facebook not long ago, was if you are classified on a regulatory level as a publisher, then that means that you are essentially on the hook for the content that you create. Yeah. And so they were trying to say, oh, actually, we are not a publisher, we're a platform. So by being classified as a platform, we're not responsible for what people say. We just sort of allow them to say it. And it's the same thing as like in a mall. People are allowed to like go to malls and protest, and the mall is not obligated to like shut them down. And if the mall doesn't get those people out of the mall, therefore they're supporting the message. Instead, the mall is allowed to say, hey, we're just like a place for people to gather, and if people say stuff here, that's on them.
Yeah. What kind of legal distinction is that? Like, is that something that you have to declare if you're going to make a website?
I think it has to do with how the business is structured.
Yeah.
So I think for example, laws and policies that govern what companies can or cannot do usually depend on what type of company it is.
Yeah.
So like there might be specific financial regulations or healthcare or any of these other types of things. And so my understanding, I mean, I'm not an expert in this, but my understanding was that you're subject to certain regulations if you are a publisher versus a platform. And so platforms are immune to certain regulations. Mm-hmm. But then by the same token, some of these tech companies, including Twitter, also have certain privileges that are like the privileges that publishers have that platforms don't, which is to say that they can control, like they have certain moderating powers over what the people using the platform say, and they can control or like promote certain messages and then profit over the promotion of those messages over others. Just taking a step back, I would have to do more research personally and probably re-listen to this particular episode to understand the argument in a deeper fashion. The high level idea is that they have this almost dual classification. They have some benefits of being a platform where they can claim agnosticism from the things that people post on the platform, but then also certain benefits of being a publisher, which is that they can profit from certain messages being promoted or, either removed or disincentivized. So actually, I think the meat of this guy's argument was less that, oh, they're breaking a law or that there's specifically something wrong that they're doing. It's more that the government, through their various loopholes and stuff that they exploit, the government is almost subsidizing them to be able to do things that normal companies are not allowed to do.
Yeah.
And part of that presumably is because, they're really big companies, they're super powerful. they're doing something new that people haven't done before. So they're sort of hard to evaluate, or hard for regulators or legislators to evaluate. And there's probably some effect of they just have a lot of cultural sway. And if you're a politician, you don't really want to be the guy that's like anti-Google. But I mean, I'm not 100% sure how all of that shakes out, but it's an interesting argument, and much more interesting than the sort of go anecdote by anecdote and try to lawyer up about which particular, well, ironically, because this guy's a lawyer, but lawyer up about which particular case is egregious or not. Mm-hmm. It's more like, is there some sort of sense of consistent treatment between cases on one platform, or even between platforms, or between companies in general?
Right.
And I think that's really what we're not seeing. I wouldn't really go deep into that. I would just say I would recommend that show, which is Robert Barnes on the Rubin Report, which is recent. But that being said, that's all in response to this stuff that happened on Rogan's show. I don't know when.
Oh, is he Alex Jones's lawyer?
Yeah, I guess he is.
Okay.
They actually didn't talk about Jones that much though. Huh. But yeah, I guess he is. I forgot about that.
This is Grokking Points, by the way.
Welcome to Grokking Points, your radical centrist guide.
This is the premier radical centrist podcast. We are your guide to new media and the modern culture war.
Do you want to do an actual intro, or is
that's fine.
Okay,
they'll get it.
Okay, they'll get. If you're here, you probably have figured this out already. Yeah. So, what are we going to be talking about today?
We had a little bit about the New Zealand thing in the beginning.
The mosque attack.
Yeah, there was just one angle I wanted to hit that from that interested me. So whenever one of these kind of shootings happens, usually in the US it's like a school shooting, or it's some kind of rampage in a public place. And I really often see this desire among the left to label those events as terrorist attacks. Have you seen this? The idea is like, whenever we see a brown person blow up a building or kill a bunch of people, that's terrorism. But whenever we see, some 18-year-old white kid do it, he's just a troubled boy, or how could he have been raised like this? And so there's a desire among the left to even the score here and make sure that we're calling those things terrorism when they're terrorism. I think school shootings largely are not terrorism. And I think this is an important distinction to make, because the word terrorism has legal weight in the United States. The government can do different things depending on whether or not an attack is actually a terrorist attack. We have a law called the Patriot Act that allows for wiretapping and all sorts of subversions of civil liberties in the case of specifically terrorist attacks. So this has been misused. For instance, when eco-terrorists blow up buildings or like release animals from testing facilities, stuff like that, the federal government has figured out a way to call those things terrorist attacks. So that gives them a whole slew of new options on how they can investigate those crimes and persecute the offenders. So I think this New Zealand attack is notable because it is in fact a terrorist attack. The perpetrator here had a political motive, and he acted upon that political motive, and he wanted his actions to have specific political consequences. They were intended to cause a specific response. I think it's important that now we recognize that this is in fact terrorism.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I feel like, you mentioned that he had published a manifesto and then live streamed this and everything. I feel like if there's a manifesto, that is a sign. Well,
it depends on what the manifesto says. If the manifesto says, I hate my life, I hate women, I want to get revenge on the jocks.
Right.
Like, I don't think that's a terrorist.
Right.
That doesn't sound politically motivated to me. That sounds like a personal problem or like severe mental issues.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. I guess, well, you said that in the United States, there's these particular laws that govern how terrorism is defined, and then therefore what is an appropriate response by, or like what's allowable by law enforcement or agencies. Is that also the case in New Zealand?
I don't think it is.
Okay.
They might have their own Patriot Act law, but they don't have their own 9/11, so I don't think they'd have passed one of those.
Right.
But they might just have different civil liberties over there that allow those kinds of things anyway. But I think the importance of calling it what it is, we live in a global society, and if this is or is not considered terrorism in New Zealand, that can be extrapolated to a similar event that would happen here.
Right.
So that's what my concern is. Americans are still watching the rhetoric that goes back and forth about this, So I think it's important that we recognize when an act is in fact terrorism.
Yeah, that's interesting. I do feel like that's not often discussed. I think people have a clear, like on a personal level, there's a clear intuitive distinction between something like manslaughter and murder, or like first degree or second degree murder, because we have this understanding there's a moral gradient. Like if you killed someone by accident, it's fundamentally not the same as like you wrote down their name in a notebook and then you stalked them and then you planned how you're going to do it, right? And then again, the distinction between that and if you were just drunk or you were in some sort of blind rage and then you just acted on your impulses as opposed to something that was planned and methodical. And that kind of makes sense to us, even if, of course, if it's someone that we know that was murdered or killed by accident or died somehow, that may not necessarily make us feel better. But on like a legal level, why does this keep happening? As a society, we just recognize that this is a thing. But I don't think that we have a very good civil or like civic understanding of this distinction between what counts as terrorism or not. And I mean, even so, then once you get to that level, probably people will say, oh, but then the Patriot Act shouldn't have those powers anyway. But then it's funny that you might at the same time argue that, which is that the Patriot Act represents an unfair expansion of federal power. But on the other hand, broadly accuse things of being terrorism that don't even match that definition.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, then what's appropriate? Like, what's the appropriate response to that if it's not increased, executive power or not judicial, but like increased power of the justice system? That's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, I don't know enough about this New Zealand case to weigh in on it, but I'll be curious to see how American sensibilities respond to the whole thing. So far, I haven't heard many people talking about it, but maybe it's just gotten to a point where people are like bored of these things, or I don't know.
The other conversation that's going around regarding this attack is, of course, the question is like, how do we prevent this in the future? A lot of the blame is being directed towards these online communities that end up radicalizing people like this.
Right.
There's a whole question now of what can we do about these especially anonymous communities or these especially unmoderated communities that can allow discussion like this. Is there something that the government can do? Should they be allowed to shut down the websites? Should they just discourage them? There's a whole free speech question surrounding this as well. That's going to be like an ongoing conversation, I guess, as things like this become more and more frequent. And it's already been a question with ISIS, the way that they use the internet. So I think it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's, one of the things that gets brought up in the question of to what degree are conservatives censored on Twitter is like usually conservatives will counter and show, oh, but you've got all of these, terrorist Twitter accounts that are totally allowed to stay up, or there's a Hamas Twitter account and it's fine, or there's ISIS recruiters and whatnot that haven't been banned. So why did this person that said men aren't women or something get banned? So yeah, that is an interesting question. I mean, I would say that the distinction for me, and I would imagine someone like an FBI agent would have a similar distinction, is are those platforms like 4chan or 8chan, are they actually used to coordinate between people? Or is it just, people are sharing memes and sentiments and one person decides to act on those sentiments more than other people?
Yeah, well, it's definitely the latter. As far as I can tell, this guy wasn't coordinating within some 8chan thread trying to get other people to commit this act of terror with him. It was kind of a lone wolf gone crazy type scenario. It's hard to combat something like that. That can happen anywhere on the internet. You could have a community that posts things like that and it's all satire and one person takes it seriously and goes crazy.
Yeah, I guess it's hard. I mean, I would imagine, you could sort of expand that argument and say, oh, well, because there are rapists in the world, therefore, we've got to ban like BDSM communities because it turned out all these rapists were also, on BDSM subreddits. And that doesn't seem like that's a healthy response to the problem. I mean, one thing in response to the this mosque shooting, I hadn't seen much of it because I've been sort of disconnected for the last couple of weeks. But what I did see was one of my friends who is from New Zealand commenting. And then his, the thrust of his comment was, I'm going to cut ties or like not be friends with people who express Islamophobic sentiment, even if it's like not as in, of course he's already cutting ties with, if his friends are terrorists or something, which isn't obviously happening, but he was saying even like little comments or anti-Muslim jokes or something like that is already not acceptable, and that he would cut ties with his friends on that basis because that encourages more of this thing happening. And that's it's interesting because that's a huge question. You end up with this fork. On the one hand, you might claim more jokes or more, microaggressions could sort of add up and lead to this giant, like, cultural, like a large shared notion that could result in violence. But then the other hand, the other interpretation is the more we push those people to the fringes of society, the more likely they are to act on their worst inhibitions or go onto 8chan and...
they're going to hear pushback a lot less often. They're not going to interact with people who are different than them and understand that those are real people and that they actually have things in common. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and then the unfortunate part about that is both of those different philosophies both seem pretty reasonable, and like reasonable people might choose one or the other, but they're based in exactly opposite intuitions about what the right thing to do is. Because if the right thing to do is to reach out to these people and like bring them into the fold and integrate them into polite society so that they're not going to get extremized, that's a completely different prescription than, okay, if my friends are even a little bit racist, I have to cut them off. Because if that's the right way to go, if the cutting off, aggressive, whatever you would say, delegitimizing of racism, that's almost an empirical question of whether that is going to result in more extremism or not.
Yeah, there's a mechanism in our culture where drawing a line somewhere and putting a group of people on the other side of the line and saying that that's beyond the pale, there's a mechanism where that works. And it turns that belief or ideology into a faux pas or a taboo. And we might see this with people who are skeptical of vaccines, or people who think that the earth is actually flat, or 9/11 truthers. We've basically done this to Alex Jones, and we've put him in a box and said everything that this person says is pretty much beyond the pale. And it's hard for me to say that should never be done, because it seems useful for some amount of beliefs. But with the argument that this whole event is turning around, which is on immigration and like how much complaining about immigration is actually racism, the people on the other side of that argument are a much larger portion of the population than the people who believe that 9/11 was done by the government.
Sure.
There's a good, probably 40% of the population of the United States that is like reasonably skeptical of more immigration. Or at least more illegal immigration. And a lot of them don't, like, they see the things that happen in other countries where people who claim that they are Muslim, blow themselves up in an airport, and they don't want that to happen here. So the easiest way to prevent that from happening here is just not let any Muslims in.
I thought you were going to say blow them up. Seems to be the preferred solution by some.
Yeah, that's the other way to go.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm like amenable to that strategy for some ideas, but I don't think it's going to work here. I just don't think that you're going to be able to box in almost half the population because they have anti-immigration intuitions. I think it's demonstrably not working, and the evidence is the election of Trump.
Sure. I mean, it's also notable that a lot of people who are anti-immigration are also immigrants, because there's a couple viewpoints on immigration that I think they get blended together a lot in reality. But if you were going to sort of separate them out, you could say one view is sort of this moral, like Puritan sort of view, which is often seen as like the racist component of white nationalism, which is, this is our country for our people, and we don't want other people coming into our country.
Yeah, there's the portion of people who care a lot about what the people who are living where they live now in 50 years are going to look like.
Right. Or like even when they're dead, basically. It's like It's like this attachment to, this is the whole blood and soil sort of rhetoric of my people were, have lived here for hundreds of years and therefore it's ours or something. But I think that's actually relatively rare to me. In my view, that's the straw man. I mean, maybe, I'm not... It's impossible to run the numbers on this, but...
It's not particularly rare on the communities that the New Zealand attacker was visiting.
Yes, yeah, agreed with that. But what I was going to say is, you said something like 40-50% of the population is leaning towards being against immigration. And I think most of that ends up being driven not by this like nationalistic or white nationalistic sentiment, but it's often by an economic sentiment. It's usually like, and this is where it comes into play that often immigrants themselves are actually against immigration, or especially legal immigrants are against illegal immigration, because from their perspective, well, not even from their perspective, it's literally true that there's going to be more competition for certain types of work, or that certain economic outcomes may be worse the more immigrants you let in. An obvious example of this would be, say that you have a generous sort of public infrastructure / public welfare policies. So like a decent amount of your public expenditure, which is paid through tax revenue, goes to helping individual people who are poor. If you let in more people into the country and then they have access to these resources, then existing citizens have to pay like a higher share of taxes in order to support those people. You can argue about whether or not that's a good or bad thing, but at least from like an individual sort of self-interested standpoint, an immigrant, a person who has already immigrated from a self-interest standpoint, should be just as likely to oppose increased immigration as incumbents, or maybe even more likely if those immigrants are more likely to be competing on a labor level or for public benefits, as with either legal immigrants or new immigrants. I don't know. I think it's overly simplistic to say, oh, if you're against immigration, it's only because you're racist or because, you don't like people from another country living happy lives. I mean, sure, I sort of buy that it could be selfish in most cases, but selfish and racist are not, overlapping concepts. In fact, some people can be very like selflessly racist in a certain way. People will even ruin their own lives in order to like fight for their quote country or race or people or something.
Yeah, and I mean, it could be the case that it literally is all racism. Like 99% of the people who oppose immigration are motivated by some xenophobic emotion and they don't know it. But if you can make the kind of argument that you just made, if you can make an argument from the position of a rational actor that like these are my reasons, that's the argument that you have to interact with. It's still wrong to assume it's motivated by xenophobia. You should still engage with the argument that's actually being made.
Right. But I fully convinced myself that my racism calibration is 100% tuned, and I can exactly tell to what degree each person is being racist in their policy positions.
You just need the slightest glimpse of their skin color first, and then and then you got perfect calibration.
Right. And I can figure out if they're straight as well.
Yeah.
And then I'll assume their gender, they're probably male, and then it's just over. I'm going to assume that this attacker in New Zealand was a white male.
Yeah.
Was he straight? Probably.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Easy game.
There are some amount of people on 4chan who believe that it was a psyop, like an inside job. I saw some people saying that they didn't even kill anybody. It's like fake blood.
Oh my god. The live stream was faked.
It gets dicey.
Wow. Okay. But that doesn't surprise me. There's conspiracy theories about all of these different types of things. Speaking of conspiracy theories, do we want to talk about Alex Jones? Now he's almost old hat because it's been a couple of weeks, but we could also...
Did we not talk about that when he went on Rogan? Is that what we're talking about? The second Rogan appearance?
Yeah, we hadn't talked about it because our last episode was with Derek.
Yeah, if you have something to say about it, you can go ahead, but I didn't watch all of it.
The story is basically Alex Jones not long ago was banned from everything meaning most social media platforms. Mm-hmm. Of course, he has a sizable following via InfoWars, and this was upsetting to a lot of people and sort of reinforced a big part of his appeal is that he's a conspiracy theorist, and he entertains a lot of different types of conspiracy theories, and people enjoy hearing about that. And the unfortunate thing is sometimes he's actually right in the sense of, he's pointed out things about, the government or about quote, globalist elites or something that has some flavor of truth to it, but then he'll also throw out shit about like aliens and goblins and putting chemicals in the water and stuff like that.
Sandy Hook being a hoax.
And Sandy Hook being a hoax, and
which they deny. Like that's what really confuses me is Alex Jones and his media company. Anytime anyone asks them about the Sandy Hook denial, they deny the denial. They claim that they never said anything about it being faked. I think Alex Jones said that he maybe like questioned it one time or something, and and they've been on him about it ever since. But there's multiple clips that you can find of him, talking about crisis actors, and on multiple episodes he did this, and he kept doing it, and eventually it was what got him banned from Twitter was doing it again on Twitter.
Right.
And it baffles me that he still just almost completely denies it and absolves himself of any of this. Did he even apologize?
I think that, at least as of this episode where he went on Rogan, he made a point to be like, yes, this definitely happened, as in Sandy Hook definitely happened. I don't remember if he specifically apologized, but he seemed like he was somewhat repentant about it. But of course, it's impossible to totally tease that out from him just like walking back things in order to get his show, maybe back onto these platforms or redeem himself somehow. I just thought it was interesting because, Rogan is a fairly mainstream, large media personality now. And for someone to be on his show usually gets a fair amount of press. And his relationship with Alex, because they've been friends for a while, has always been slightly controversial or contentious. And this appearance, Jones's appearance on Rogan's show, I think it was in end of February or early March, it was just completely insane. It was like, I guess it was everything that you would expect, but It was Jones sort of throws in all of this crazy rambling about aliens and goblins and elves and whatnot, but then occasionally says stuff that's reasonable, and then talks about Sandy Hook, and then talks about like wanting to be choked out on air, and it just goes really strange places. At some point they talk about this other guy, Eddie Bravo, comes in as a guest, and they start talking about flat earth stuff, and they don't seem to be quite clear on whether or not they think the flat earth conspiracy is real or not, and then they decide that they're gonna like fund a voyage where they're going to take a ship, take it out towards Antarctica, and then try to see if they can find the edge of the world, and then like live stream it. And it's just a completely bonkers show. And half the time Rogan is just sitting there kind of observing what's happening and being like, wait, what? Like, what are you talking about? Like, why? Oh, wait, actually, maybe that kind of makes sense. You're blowing my mind. And it's just, I don't know, it was really ridiculous. I guess there's another question there of to what extent am I fueling the fire here by being entertained by this and like throwing Rogan my ad impression money for having Jones on. But honestly, it's hard enough for me to take it seriously. That to me, it is kind of just a funny joke.
Yeah.
That being said, if people are really extremized by Jones, maybe I should take this more seriously.
Do you think Rogan should take it more seriously? Do you think that Rogan has a responsibility to keep Alex Jones off of his platform and not give him a platform?
I mean, from my perspective, just like listening and watching the show, it seems fairly clear that in this environment, the ridiculous parts of Jones, like being allowed to express themselves, it's too hard for me to take him seriously that I can't even imagine another person taking it seriously.
Yeah.
And at least from my view, the interesting thing about Jones is that he's this huge personality. He's pretty nuts, obviously. He says a lot of really ridiculous things, but even when he's saying something that's really ridiculous, the goblins and elves rhetoric and stuff that somehow gets into his statements, if you are paying attention to what exactly he's saying, it usually makes some amount of sense. Like on some sort of metaphorical level, it makes sense. So for example, he will often talk about the big tech companies and he'll refer to them as psychic vampires. Yeah. And so what he says is that like they are sucking out your soul or like your life force through the technology.
Yeah.
Which
he's like, a poet.
Yeah, like on a literal level, of course it doesn't make sense if you think that he's talking about real vampires, and maybe he thinks that that's what he's talking about in his head, but he is expressing something that actually does make some real sense in the real world.
Yeah.
Like there are people that are actively mind-fucking you for their own like financial benefit, and that's a real thing that's happening that people should care about. But if they care about it in the sense that they think there's actual vampires, then that's a problem. So I don't know how to like. I mean, personally, I don't really listen to Jones, and I only actually have heard him on Rogan, and I would never believe something like well, let me revise that. I don't believe that Sandy Hook was faked, and I think for the most part, people talking about that sort of thing are just sort of stoking division or outrage.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I mean, Jones personally cites all of these confirmed declassifications of government conspiracies that were real, that also sound completely insane if we didn't know that they were real.
Yeah.
And so it's like...
Is Alex Jones just like Andy Kaufman? Like he's this performance actor who's like channeling some like kernel of truth through these ridiculous claims, and like he's just this like impossible to pin down. What would be the word here? Like, is he a crisis actor?
Yeah, he's his own crisis actor. Yeah, I don't know, man. Like, I mean, again, I don't buy the vast majority of anything that he says, and even when I do, I usually buy it on like a non-literal sort of metaphorical level of like, maybe in general you should be skeptical about the government or something.
Yeah.
But that being said, I mean, okay, just imagine the scenario. What if in like 20 years the CIA declassified that Sandy Hook actually was like a government conspiracy, like a false flag operation or something? Like, would that change your view on Jones? Does he go from being like this crazy madman to like a gaslit, anti-government prophet or something? I don't know. I mean, considering, again, I personally don't believe that it was faked in any way. And I think that, in 99% of cases, a conspiracy is so unlikely and requires so many things to go right that there's no way that it's actually true. But there have been conspiracies that people would have said that were proven true later.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't know. I feel like at the very least, people should be able to voice these sorts of things. Now, that being said, I don't think that he should, drive people to go and, harass Sandy Hook families because they might be crisis actors or something. I mean, we need to have some sort of semblance of civil society here. And I don't even really mind if platforms ban people like him, but I do think that's interesting to, at least like on a personal level, it's interesting for me to hear him and like understand kind of what he's trying to say, even if I'm not going to take him seriously or like make memes about him 90% of the time.
I just listened to an NPR broadcast. I forget if it was like This American Life or something, but they talked to one of the Sandy Hook fathers. I think it was Sandy Hook. It was one of those that Alex Jones, like, he doxed him on air, actually.
That's pretty bad.
Jones, like, posted his address and like, phone number, and he kept doing it. Like the guy's moved, like, 3 or 4 times or something, and his address kept getting out. I'm not going to go over the whole podcast, but it was a good listen. I hadn't realized the extent to the madness that was going on, and it makes me a little more okay with Jones having been banned.
Yeah. Isn't that illegal, though? Like, isn't that literally illegal?
Yeah, I think
that's
so.
Not the same. So why is nobody pressing charges? Like, why isn't that guy pressing charges against
I
Jones?
don't really know.
I mean, I guess, well, no, he is. Or maybe not that guy, but there is some sort of suit by the Sandy Hook families against him, isn't there?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it'll be interesting to see how that goes. We'll see what this guy, Robert Barnes, has to say, because I guess he's defending Jones.
Yeah.
Again, from like an outsider perspective, my opinion is I personally find it entertaining or like interesting to hear him talk on Rogan. But I've never watched InfoWars, and I've only ever seen meme highlight reels and stuff of Jones. And that's probably how I'm going to keep my involvement. And as far as him getting banned from places, I really don't mind him getting banned from whatever number of platforms. Honestly, my view on that is like, just if he's going to be banned, then it should be symmetrical. Like, I don't see any reason why he should get banned, but then people have these like anti-American, like anti-CIA conspiracy theories from the opposite side shouldn't also be banned, if that's like the logic of it,
Well, but if I don't want Jones to be banned for posting conspiracy theories. I want him to be banned for doxing people,
right?
And going after specific people or groups,
right. Yeah, but isn't it also the case that people do that? Like, aren't there people sending like outrage mobs, individual people on like far left Twitter right now as well? That's my understanding, is that people actually do that.
Yeah, but I don't know that there's a blue checkmark media company that's doing that on the left.
Right.
And, and trying to go after specific people. They're just like egging people at conferences.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Like, especially insofar as, InfoWars as an organization is concerned, that's definitely not okay for them to greenlight that sort of activity. Even the other standard conservative shows don't try to do shit like that.
No.
Like Ben Shapiro's never done anything remotely approaching that. So yeah, anyway, I guess I'm in agreement, but I would just watch Jones on Rogan anyway, just for the fun of it and see what's going on.
You got to be careful. He is a gateway to the alt-right.
Yeah, that's true. I have heard that. But I already started with Jordan Peterson, so that's like the worst of the worst as far as those guys are concerned.
You're already too far gone.
Yeah, I'm an incel, as they say. All right, well, so were there other news stories that you want to talk about? I had some not news-related topics because I haven't been paying attention to the news. But
well, the other things I want to talk about have been in the news, but they're not like, I don't know if they meet that that bar for you.
Sure.
Ilhan Omar, is that how you pronounce her name?
That's how I'm pronouncing her name, but I don't know.
Okay, so Ilhan Omar, the congresswoman, has been the target of a new like Twitter. What do we call these? Like outrage machine things. There was a whole kerfuffle where she was accused of being anti-Semitic. This is another instance in a long line of people being called anti-Semitic for criticizing Israel, the terrible crime of criticizing the foreign policy of Israel. This is the one that caused the most controversy. Can we get the context for that one? Yeah.
Okay,
So Glenn Greenwald, the journalist, is going on Twitter. GOP leader Kevin McCarthy threatens punishment for Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib over their criticisms of Israel. It's stunning how much time U.S. political leaders spend defending a foreign nation, even if it means attacking free speech rights of Americans. And so Ilhan Omar responded to this tweet by linking to it, and she said the words, "It's all about the Benjamins." And that is what was considered anti-Semitic.
Right. So what is it and what is all? What's the Benjamins?
Well,
what does she mean?
So I assume she means that, anytime a politician is called anti-Semitic for having the audacity to criticize Israel, that happens because of money. Well, that's one interpretation. It happens because there are financial interests involved in protecting Israel and in the United States staying close to Israel as an ally. The other interpretation is that I guess Benjamin is a Jewish name, and so it's
like Netanyahu.
Yeah. So it's like, it's all about those rich Jewish bankers, that control everything. Like that. That's
like Ben Bernanke.
Yeah. So that's what's being read into. So I don't know. Do you think that's anti-Semitic? It's all about the Benjamins?
I mean, just as a general comment, I would say that I agree that anti-Israel sentiment in general doesn't have to be anti-Semitic. Like, that's not the same thing. And I also don't think that like this entire lawyering up about whether somebody is being racist or not. I feel like, you can just talk about like why are we not just talking about Israel policy? Why do we have to talk about whether specific people are racist or not? I'm kind of tired of that. That being said, I was originally on this comment is benign, doesn't actually mean anything train. Mm-hmm. But then, I suppose predictably, of all people, Ben Shapiro kind of gave me color on why this isn't as simple. So his argument to me was kind of compelling. So he's been talking about, he's, the first person on the Ilhan Omar is an anti-Semite train since the beginning. But his argument, I think, on this topic is fairly coherent. So his point is that anybody should be free to criticize Israel or like the actions of their Israeli government or policy or whatever, and that none of that should be considered anti-Semitic. But what should be considered anti-Semitic is statements about either Jewish people or about like groups of Jewish people acting together that isn't specifically criticizing like those actions, but rather the people. And so he referenced this tweet, and the way that he dissected it was, so he was talking about in specific relation to AIPAC. AIPAC it's an acronym for American Israel Public Affairs Committee, and this is a nonprofit organization that you can think of similar to the NRA. It's like kind of like a lobbying group, which is predominantly Jewish people that lobby for international Jewish interests, which of course is going to include Israel, but also includes people like Jews in America. And this is a fairly big lobbying group, I guess. I don't know exactly, but I don't know. I've heard that's among the biggest lobbying groups that often, circles around the Capitol. And so Shapiro's argument, I guess, is that AIPAC, it's not chiefly comprised of the Israeli government sending money over to lobby the United States government. AIPAC is comprised of Jewish people living in the United States that donate to it in order to promote pro-Israel, I guess, foreign policy stances because they think that we should be an ally with Israel. So his description of this is, to tie everything together, the Congress people that are favorable to Israel because of pro-Israel lobbying are favorable that lobbying takes place because American Jews want the American government to behave in a certain way.
Sure.
And then they donate their money in order to promote that. And so he says that by Ilhan Omar implying that the reason, Congress people act in a certain way is because they are And then okay, so then the other comment that Ilhan Omar made recently was she said that Jews in America were playing two sides, or like playing on two teams at the same time, basically saying that they're pro-America and pro-Israel at the same time. So there's some sort of conflict of interest. And so most of her criticisms have been criticisms of, quote, Israel, have actually been about criticisms of American Jews donating towards pro-Israel, this AIPAC, pro-Israel lobbying. Mm-hmm. And so his point was that she's not actually criticizing the Israeli government, she's criticizing American Jews. And then he says that that's the distinction between something that's anti-Semitic versus something that's Israeli foreign policy. Mm-hmm. So if she had simply said, I don't think that Israel should be doing this, or sort of calling out policy or actions of the Israeli government that are unfavorable, then it wouldn't be anti-Semitic. But because she's sort of implicitly criticizing American Jews supporting Israel, then that's and then tying that into money, which is usually how Jews are criticized, is because they're wealthy lawyers or bankers or something like that, or George Soros, then that's what crosses the line to anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And because this is a pattern of behavior among her talking points, and that she's criticizing this money going into politics rather than criticizing actions of Israel itself, that's what makes it anti-Semitic. And I think that's somewhat compelling. And the only caveat to all of that is that I just don't really care. So I'm not going to get on the case about it anyway.
I mean, I don't particularly buy that. I think Ilhan Omar strikes me as someone who's relatively opposed to money in politics in general, and I think this isn't out of character for her to criticize a specific domain in which money in politics is a problem. She could very well be anti-Semitic. I don't know, but I think that any of the comments that she has made so far could be made without any sort of anti-Semitism.
Well, so then in terms of the all about the Benjamins comment, is your interpretation that she's talking about the influence of the Israeli government, or that she's talking about the actions of American Jews in supporting Israel?
She could be talking about AIPAC, and that would be fine. I think you could make the same exact comment about the NRA donating, even though they don't really donate that much. You could make the same comment about the military-industrial complex. It doesn't strike me as anti-Semitic just because it's about money. That's almost anti-Semitic. It's right. If you talk about money, it must be about Jews. What else could it be about?
Right.
Yeah, I don't really buy that.
Yeah, and yeah, I sort of agree that I don't buy that either. If we're going to play if you criticize a group, actions of a group, and that group happens to be composed of a certain race, therefore you're racist. Because from my perspective, you can just as well criticize Planned Parenthood without being misogynist, or you could criticize Black Lives Matter without being, racist. Yeah. And so I think, from my perspective, all those things should be fair game. But that being said, I do think that if you are of a certain mindset, that if I had to, I guess I shouldn't do mind reading here, but if I had to guess, I think Ilhan is of the, sort of cultural zeitgeist that if somebody else did criticize Planned Parenthood, it's very likely that she would view that as being misogynist.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that there's some sort of double standard being held there. I think that it's both true that she shouldn't be considered anti-Semitic for tweeting stuff like this, but I also think that she shouldn't criticize other people for being racist or misogynist based on sort of vague statements of support of vague groups of people.
I totally agree. Ilhan Omar might be my least favorite member of Congress. I think she has some really, really terrible takes. She's especially partisan. She makes the kind of criticisms about racism that Ben Shapiro might be criticizing her about. She makes those kinds of comments all the time.
Right.
And yeah, I totally agree. It's not it sounds exactly like something that she would say about somebody criticizing, a Muslim public affair committee or something.
Well, right. Or you could just as well say it's almost the exact same argument to say to criticize terrorists or criticize Islamic State, and then say, oh, that implies that you're Islamophobic because you criticize the Islamic State. Or say that we should, be careful about immigrants from, terrorist majority countries. And the only reason that you could think that is because you're racist against Muslims or something. And that's sort of all the conversation that's going on right now. And I do think it's kind of disappointing for Ben Shapiro to sort of turn around and play this anti-Semitic card where he's been against identity politics or victim blaming.
Yeah, this is this is very id pol.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, and I think increasingly we're seeing these conservatives realize that like they've been arguing against playing the victim card for so long that whenever the chance comes that they can play the victim card, they're like, actually, this is some real good shit.
Yeah.
Like, I love calling out people as being anti-Semitic.
It's not that hard. Like you can make almost the same arguments, but just turn it into a hypocrisy argument. Like,
right.
Play the hypocrisy card. All you have to do is point out the way that your political opponents are doing the exact same thing that they complain about. It's a really effective strategy, and Ben Shapiro just is kind of playing the exact same game instead.
Yeah, and I mean, it helps that he's like extremely Jewish, so he's probably not really thinking about this one too clearly, but I think he could be more tactical about it. Or maybe he's at the next level of tacticality where he thought about that and then realized that playing the victim card was even more effective or something. I don't know. This entire thing is very interesting, especially since now that we've realized that like the white supremacist / white nationalist / quote like Nazi elements of the right have now been so conflated that it's seen as totally consistent to at 1 second criticize the right for being predominantly composed of dog whistling Nazis, and then also criticize them for being influenced by the evil like Israel government.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting. And then so now Nazism has been completely transformed to being like an anti-black thing or something, or like anti-gay. Yeah. I mean, I guess I can't say I know that much about the Nazi government, but I'm pretty sure most of it was about Jews.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess there was some gypsy and like there's some sort of like immigrant or like Aryan race superiority that was core of that. But
they definitely cleansed homosexuals. But yeah. I mean, the movement was largely started because of the obvious Jewish problem at the time.
I mean, I guess it would be sort of interesting, tactically speaking, for like a proto-fascist, society to just come out and say, actually, we totally support Jews. And then that's their move to like get the rest of the races and, sexual orientations out of there as long as they've allied with the Jews or something.
Yeah.
Feels like the most reasonable explanation is just to leave all that stuff aside and say this is a new thing, that there aren't actually like proto-fascists taking over the country. Or maybe, I guess, proto-fascist implies it's a different type of fascism that doesn't involve the same sort of Jew problem phenomenon.
I mean, the alt-right still hates Jews.
Well, right, but so my point would be that the alt-right still does hate Jews, but they're distinct from like Trump or neocons or whatever conservatives are currently running the government.
Yeah, but now. I mean that's because Trump isn't actually alt-right. He just signals he definitely dog whistles to the alt-right, but he does it on particular axes that are not necessarily anti-Semitic. Because he has to play that game, and he has to play the game that all the Republicans have played for the last however many decades, where you unilaterally support our ally in the Middle East.
Right. I mean, my assumption my active working assumption about Trump at this point is that he's kind of like a neural net where he doesn't actually know what he's doing. He just knows that it works. Yeah. Like he has some sort of reward function of like people, ratings or people like clapping when he talks. And he's like, he doesn't strive for consistency in any of these things. He's just, what is going to get people to like me more or whatever. And then which is why he'll like very easily go and walk back his quote, alt-right dog whistling, or like in the same 5-minute clip, he'll contradict himself like twice. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe this is all just, intentional disinformation, confusion campaign chess. Or something. Yeah. But I think most of it, he's just like operating on instinct and he just goes with whatever feels like it's right to say at that time.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay.
Yeah, let's move on. Do you want to talk about Tucker Carlson?
Yeah, we can talk about him.
A couple things happened with the Tuck.
Yeah.
The Tuck might have gotten cucked.
It turns out maybe you can cuck the Tuck. But so why don't you describe what happened? I did follow that to a very small degree.
Yeah, well, for background, a few weeks ago, there was a leaked audio or a leaked segment on his show where this kind of, I guess he's like a Marxist economist, maybe a socialist economist.
You're talking about the guy from Davos?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't actually know who he is, but I watched the video. He went on Tucker Carlson's show and very like smugly turned Tucker Carlson into like a wild, raging maniac within the span of like 5 minutes. He got Tucker to start swearing at him and calling him an idiot.
Kind of like a Bill O'Reilly moment.
Yeah.
Like Tucker just kind of snapped.
Yeah, and there was a point where I think Tucker realized that this wasn't going to make it on the air, so that he could just kind of say whatever he wanted, and it turned out it did make it on the air. So, well, not on the air.
Not on the air, but leaked,
it got on the internet, which is the new air.
The new air, yeah. Got into the ether.
Gotta breathe that in. Most recently, there was another leaked series of audio clips.
Well, this wasn't really leaked, right? It was like resurfaced.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So a few clips came out where Tucker went on a comedy right-wing-ish radio show.
It's Bubba the Love Sponge.
Yeah, in like from 2006 to 2011, something like that, in that range. He went on that show a series of times and made some questionable remarks.
Yeah, for reference, this radio show is very similar to something like Howard Stern, where he would just have, semi-famous people on and they would just shoot the shit in a totally casual environment.
Alexis Stewart, we run into her all the time.
She seems
Cunt.
awful.
Yeah, she is awful.
They're very cunty.
She seems extremely
I like
cunty.
to hear that word out of. Oh yeah, I stepped over him. She seems what? Now go ahead.
She just does seem a little cunty. Yeah, I mean, you said it. I'm just agreeing with you. I don't use that word because
Right, I'd love for Tucker Carlson tonight on MSNBC. A girl that comes across kind of cunty.
Well, she does. I mean, I heard her. Now I'm a Brent fan, so okay, I'm stating my bias right out front here. But I heard her on with him, and I just wanted to give her the spanking she so desperately.
Yeah,
It's called, quote, Shock Jock radio show.
Yeah.
Where it was designed to be like a little bit edgy.
Yeah. So when I first heard it, that was basically my reaction. Was I assumed that was what was going on, and while I would be maybe taken aback if I heard Tucker say some of those things in like a polite dinner or like in front of an audience or like on a stage or something like that or on his show, that might shock me a little bit. I don't really care if it's in that kind of setting. But I was talking about this with my girlfriend this morning, and she pointed out to me that he had like reprimanded Samantha Bee. Do you know when that happened? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I don't.
Okay, well, he went after Samantha Bee some time ago for her using a certain C word on her show. And he said something like, I don't know any man who would say such terrible things or something like that.
Right, she was referring to Ivanka Trump, right?
Yeah, feckless cunt. Yes.
Yeah. I thought you were going to not say it.
No. Yeah, I this is particularly hypocritical to my eyes. One of the most egregious things about this whole Trump thing is that this was like the family values party for years and years and years and years and years. And like this
You
was...
mean Republicans?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, the GOP. This was the party that if you slightly stepped out of line, there would be a million Fox News watchers clutching their pearls and going, I can't believe he could say something like that about the Jews or like about the family unit or Christianity or, any of these things. I can't believe Obama could use such language in this setting. There's really been a stark turn there, and I'm surprised that Tucker, I didn't notice him reacting to Samantha Bee at the time, but I'm surprised that even happened, really, in retrospect.
You're surprised that he called her out, or that he... Okay.
Yeah, and not just because of this like leaked audio, but because Tucker is like generally hesitant to criticize Trump in general. Yeah, I haven't seen him make the same kind of comments about Trump as he did about Samantha Bee, and Trump has likely said some worse things.
So you're just saying that Tucker seems like he's being hypocritical by even calling anybody out?
Yeah.
Okay. But what do you think about the leaked tapes? I presume that you actually you heard what you heard his old appearances, right?
Yeah. No, I just gave my take on that, right?
Yeah.
Like if I had a dinner party with Tucker and my family was sitting there and he starts spouting off this kind of stuff, yeah, that would be unacceptable. I would have some polite words with him. But, doing it on a comedy show, I think you kind of know what you are going to get when you watch a show like that. It doesn't really change my opinion of Tucker Carlson in a huge way. So yeah, I just don't really care about that. But the fact that years later he would criticize another comedian on her own comedy show for like using some sharp language, that's also unacceptable to me.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is another example of this tactic of either pulling the victim card or politically correct language policing. Turns out that this is just as powerful when invoked on the right.
Yeah, everybody does it.
Yeah, and so I think he merely discovered the fact that he can call out, Samantha Bee for saying something, misogynistic or something,
And again, he doesn't have to make that argument. There's a perfectly serviceable hypocrisy argument just sitting on the table right there. Like,
right.
Samantha Bee, you would not find it acceptable if any right-wing host used that kind of language in regards to, like, I don't know,
Michelle Obama.
Yeah, or like a Hillary daughter or a Clinton daughter. Like that's a totally serviceable, very compelling, powerful argument. And instead Tucker goes in this like stupid, partisan, boring, hypocritical direction.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't, it doesn't surprise me at all that Carlson would behave in a hypocritical manner, although notable that this statement that he made was from maybe a year or more ago, or that the situation with Samantha Bee was from kind of a while ago. And then in this more recent round where these audio tapes have been, these quotes of him on Bubba the Love Sponge have been circulated, notably there was this huge like activist sort of response where advertisers were influenced to pull their support from his program, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it was something like 50% of the advertisers on his program got pulled in the last week or something.
Yeah.
And so it became a huge thing that Fox News was kind of standing behind Tucker and saying, we understand that these advertisements have been pulled and we've heard the tapes, but ultimately we stand by Tucker and we think this has been whatever. I don't remember the exact statement, but they see it as an attack on him and trying to discredit him, mm-hmm. and they're standing behind him. They could just as easily have like fired his ass.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see that now there's this, my personal support or take or whatever on Tucker aside, I personally don't like him at all. But I think the interesting phenomenon here is going to be, I think this ad warfare really picked up around the time of Chick-fil-A, where it became known that Chick-fil-A donated to like a Prop 8 campaign way back in 2008 or 9 or something, and then people started boycotting Chick-fil-A, and then that was when I first started paying attention to this, and then ever since then it's felt like every year or something there's some other company being boycotted or supported because they've taken one or another stance on social issues. And I feel like unless something changes, the logical extension of this, where it's going, is that there's going to be companies that are like, there's a media company that makes certain statements, companies choose to advertise on that media company's platforms based on like their political support of that message, and then those advertisers themselves also have their products bought on the basis of whether they support one or another political message, like Nike supporting, Black Lives Matter via Colin Kaepernick. And then eventually, again, if this doesn't change, it seems like the ultimate result is that everybody's workplaces and media environments and products they buy is all just like sliced apart based on the moral values of each company.
Yeah. So we're gonna have a left wing Nike and a right wing Adidas and a left wing Colgate and a right wing whatever.
Yeah, Total and then you can't wear like anti-LGBT pants or something. And it seems like this
corduroys are out.
Yeah,
fucking Nazi.
Yeah. No. And it just feels like it feels like more than any of the Marxist rhetoric, this is one significant failure point of capitalism. Because capitalism almost, it relies on the fact that you can have this vast network of people that don't have to live in the same place, don't have to speak the same language, they don't have to use the same currency, they don't have to have the same values, they don't have to have anything in common, and yet they can still sort of implicitly transact or trade with each other over these vast ideological or physical distances.
Yeah, even though we all disagree about civil liberties and economics, we can all get together and decide what the best chicken sandwich is.
Right, yeah, I suppose so. Or even the anti-factory farming people can still go to McDonald's and order some fries if they decided that that's their shtick. And so, of course, there are places where where the line has already been drawn, like people don't want to buy cars if they're particularly environmentally conscious, or people they only want to buy clothes that are made in America because they're worried about slave labor or non-fair trade labor in other countries. And of course, to a certain extent, all of that is legitimate, but it does seem that the more that you slice that up, like if you stop slicing it at where there's slave trade in the country in the products you're buying, and you instead slice that at, is the pillow that you're buying being advertised on a right-wing news show that said something mildly offensive to women or something, and that's the line where you're going to draw it, then it starts getting a little bit more dicey. And I'm very curious to see how that like trickles down into the culture, or if people end up stopping doing that, or if it just keeps getting more haywire.
At the moment, I can picture the dystopia that you're describing in my head, but Chick-fil-A's are still opening up in New York City, and they're still like growing like crazy, even though
thank God.
Like
thank God for capitalism.
Yeah. Even though like I can't go there without someone telling me about how it's like their guilty pleasure, or how they still harbor some grudge about this chicken sandwich. And I just don't think right now, I don't think people care enough, or I don't think enough people care enough to subvert the value question. It's still the best chicken sandwich for the money, so fuck the gays, I guess. Yeah, I see what you're saying, and I can imagine it going in that direction, but I just don't think it is quite yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I was saying if there's like nothing that changes, this is kind of the logical conclusion.
Yeah.
And my guess is that there's a certain point where people just can't stand the utilitarian calculus, and they're just like, I'm just going to buy the chicken sandwich. And I mean, I think that's what happens with, we've all known about Foxconn and how they, supposedly don't treat their workers well in China when they're manufacturing iPhones. And that hasn't stopped a single leftist from buying an iPhone.
Yeah.
Like, they're not like, okay, I guess I'll go buy the One Plus now or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I'll buy a made in America smartphone that costs $10,000 instead of $1,000. Not a single person's doing that. And so I think at a certain point, people can only afford to make these judgments if it doesn't impact them at all. Probably the anti-Chick-fil-A people are still going to eat their chicken at Church's Chicken or something instead, and it's only 5% worse and costs 10% more. But if it's a real sacrifice, I'm betting not many people are going to turn to Amish society.
Yeah, no, I think much more likely is we're going to see a worsening split of our social media platforms, and before long, if we keep going in this direction, we're going to see a Twitter and a Gab and a Instagram and some right-wing equivalent where you can, post swastikas and not get banned or something like that. And we're going to keep seeing those pop up. That, I think, is more likely to worsen division than like a certain chicken place being somewhere and a different chicken place being popular elsewhere. It's hard for capitalism to devolve in that way, I think, given the way that our society is geographically laid out. Like wherever you live, most of the people around you are going to share about the same political beliefs. You're kind of either in a rural area or you're in an urban area, so you're kind of either in a right-wing area or a left-wing area. The way that the internet is structured is much more global, and I think it's much more likely to see worsening division in that area.
Right. And then that could happen also. Like I feel like how it is now, I'm probably more similar living, in or near San Francisco to a person that lives like in or near Singapore than I am to someone who lives in like Los Banos or something.
Yeah.
Las Banos. Is that a meaningful difference?
Los Baños?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, because baños is like bathroom, right? Well, I don't know. Anyway, I guess I would expect to see something similar. Although when I'm tying it specifically to products or companies, I'm curious to what point it starts shaping people's like physical environments and not just their psychological environments. I don't know what I'm saying.
Okay. Do you have anything else?
Well, I had some like not news related topics I thought would be interesting to discuss. I don't know how much we can go into them. Like one would be just a discussion of how digital minimalism has been going for me.
Yeah.
Because
go for it. Tell me about your last. How long has it been? A week or 2 weeks?
It's been 2 weeks.
Okay.
At the beginning of March that I started. I read this book called Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport, and the core concept there is that people's relationship with technology is sort of out of whack right now, and that people have too much influence on their minds and their attention constantly, and it's predominantly driven by, for smartphones, computers, social media technology, notifications, outrage culture. It's beneficial to step back from that a little bit and to sort of break some of these sort of addictive behaviors that we've all adapted to, like constantly checking our phone, even if we're out to dinner with our friends, or playing, too many online video games all day, anything like this. And so the digital minimalism philosophy is you can still engage with technology where it's useful and provides value to your life, but try to cut out the situations where it's not actually providing value and you're just sort of scrolling infinitely through Reddit and then feeling unsatisfied, which turns out is how, a surprising amount of people are spending their time nowadays. So I tried at the beginning of March to cut out most of these major sources. So at least on the surface, I committed to cutting out Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I deleted some messaging apps on my phone. I uninstalled all the video games I usually play. I decided to stop looking at porn. So there's a few different vectors at which I approach this. Now, to be honest, 2 weeks in, it's been pretty hard to 100% leave those things. So I find myself occasionally just going and opening up Reddit and then being like, okay, I'll give myself a couple minutes, and then end up spending more than that. Basically, just breaking my own rules. For the most part, I have stuck to it, and especially during the day from 8 a.m. to maybe 6 p.m., I pretty much don't spending time on those platforms, which has been really good. But whenever I have a gap, something, but I've been working during the day, and then when I have a gap of I have nothing to do, I don't have work to do, and Chantal's not around, my girlfriend's not around, then I really have this deep, deep urge to just go scroll through Reddit or go open Twitch and watch my favorite streamer. And it's been very difficult to resist that. And I'm realizing now, I guess it emboldens me to want to commit more to digital minimalism because I realize how much it's affected me. But it's just so hard to actually do a real thing sometimes. To even just go and read a book or something simple, much less something more complicated than that, join a sports team or start painting as a hobby or any of these things I could be doing. It just takes enough activation energy that I really just want to go and play some Hearthstone. Yeah. I'm not sure what to do about that, but I do want to keep this cleanse going and see how it goes. I suppose the interesting thing as far as our podcast is concerned, because I've been off Twitter, I really haven't been exposed to as much news as I normally am. And honestly, that's been the easiest one for me to cut out. Yeah. Did you end up reading the book or?
No, I haven't gone through it yet. It's something that interests me. I think most people don't quite realize how dependent they are on some amount of internet, social media or internet news sources, things like that. Here's a story. It was either in college or just after college a few years ago. I took a road trip with my friends up to Portland, and the whole ride up I was pretty much either talking to them or on my phone or whatever. And then on the way down, my phone had died, and I just didn't have access to a charger for whatever reason. But I bought a book from a really cool bookstore up there. I forget what it's called. Do you know the one I'm talking about?
In Portland?
Yeah, there's this really big, famous bookstore.
Yes.
Yeah, so that one. Anyway. So I got this Murakami book that I had really enjoyed in high school, and I wanted to reread it. I read it pretty much from the time we left Portland to the time we pulled up into my driveway. So some 14 hours or something like that. And I'd gotten, I think, probably 90% of the way through with it. I'd almost finished. It's a pretty big book.
Was this IQ84 or what?
It was Wind Up Bird.
Okay.
The Wind Up Bird Chronicle.
Right.
Excellent book. I have since reread it again.
Was it Powell's bookstore?
Yes, it's that one. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I don't know exactly how far I got through, but it was well over halfway. I was really into it, and I was like, wow, I've gotten so much more out of this book on this read through. I really want to get inside and finish it. As soon as I got home, I never picked it up again.
Right. You went inside, you charged your phone, and then while it was charging, well, it's charging now, I can turn it on and start using it immediately.
How many texts did I get?
Yeah, and you're stretched out across the room so that you can because your charging cable isn't very long and you're against the wall.
Yeah. So this is something that I guess if you had asked me beforehand, I would not have expected to happen. I think I would have expected to, and maybe if I was really, really motivated, I don't remember exactly how motivated I was, but if I was really motivated, I could have finished it. But I just didn't have any desire to. there was just more interesting things outside of those pages. Yeah, it's definitely something that I think I should look into. I don't feel like my internet use is a massive problem. I don't feel some strong urge to be constantly checking my phone when I'm out at a dinner or, when I'm with friends. I feel like I'm pretty good at being able to suppress that impulse, but I know that I overuse social media. So I guess I would be curious to see what the effects would be after that kind of cleanse. Have you noticed any adjacent effects on your psyche? Are you better at focusing, or is it easier to meditate? Anything like that?
Yeah, I do think there's a relationship with meditation here, which is probably why there's been a resurgence in mindfulness in the past 10-ish years. Mm-hmm. I think it has coincided with this with our increasingly saturated digital environment. So what I've noticed is not that I'm more focused when I am focused. Like if I'm actually working on something, my amount of focus doesn't really change at all. But what I have noticed is that in these little moments where I have free time and I have nothing to do, even if I end up going on my phone or going to Reddit or whatever my habit pattern is, I always notice that I'm doing that. And I always notice okay, maybe I shouldn't do this, but I will. It's not quite as automatic as it used to be. Or a super simple example is when I go to the bathroom, I'll always bring my phone. And I'm like, well, if I'm going to shit for 2 minutes anyway, I might as well check Twitter.
2 minutes? Are you a speed shitter?
Yeah.
Get the fuck out of here. We're not friends anymore.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? Is if I go in with no phone, I'm just sitting there bored, and I end up magically finishing much faster than if I bring my phone. I'm like, well, I guess I'll just wait for a little bit extra to come out, and it takes me 20 minutes. And then Chantal's like, were you in there that whole time? And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, I was just I was playing Words with Friends,
Yeah.
And I had to come up with my perfect word before I got up. And so that's mostly what I've noticed. And it does feel almost a little bit meditative when I'll make that split decision of, I'm sitting there, I have nothing to do. I'm waiting in line for Chipotle or something. And my instinct is I want to pull up my phone, stick in my favorite podcast and play it for this 2 minutes while I'm in line. And instead I'll just sit there and force myself to do nothing or wait. And then when I do that, it does feel like a mindfulness experience where I'm looking around, I'm kind of seeing what other people are doing. I'm looking at the design of the menu, or I'm starting to notice things that before I couldn't stand. I couldn't get over that hump of boredom that I would actually start noticing things. And instead I would just plug in. And one of the main points of the book, Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport, is the importance of solitude. And the way that he defines solitude in the book is a state of not being influenced by other minds. So for him, it's not just a technology thing. The technology is a means by which to be connected to other minds, but it would also be if you're in a conversation with someone, that's not solitude. Even if you're out in the wilderness, if you're talking to a person, it's not solitude. Solitude would be meditation is the prototypical example, or you're going on a run, or a late night walk or something like that. Or even you could be in a crowded space like a mall where there's a ton of people, but if you're just standing there by yourself, you're not listening to anybody, you're just observing what's going on or thinking, then that counts as solitude. Yeah, you can think of a lost in translation type situation. That is the main thing that I've noticed, is not actually the impact of technology, but this impact of not ever having solitude in my life, which is whenever I have a moment where my brain is alone to think, I'm plugging into something, listening to a podcast or scrolling through a infinity pool, they call it, when there's constantly sourcing content from Reddit or Twitter. I do think that solitude is lacking in my life, and I do crave it in a certain way. And sometimes the opposite thing will happen, where say I'm listening to a podcast and I'll have a unique thought, and I'm I have to stop this podcast so I can think through this thought. But I think it's more often that and now that I notice it more, it's more often that the opposite thing happens, which is I'm trapped in my own individual existence, and I need something else to stimulate me. And I think this shows up at its worst if Chantal is out of town or something, or my roommates are gone, I'm home alone, I just have no idea what to do with myself. I'm I have to go and watch Twitch. I have to have somebody talking to me, or else I feel this deep loneliness. Yeah. Which is, I don't know, it's a little bit terrifying, but something I'm trying to get more comfortable with.
Yeah, one thing that's kept me from becoming motivated enough to do the same kind of cleanse as you is the fact that I feel like my moments of solitude are I'm relatively good at calibrating when I need that, because I do crave it the same way. And there's times when my brain is so busy that I can't even have music on, and I just need to like drive in total complete silence and just run through the thoughts that are going through my head. I like I've told my girlfriend that we will never put a speaker in our shower, because that's like the last bastion of meditative solitude that I have consistently in my life. I even have like one of those wireless Bluetooth speakers, and that's like water resistant. I could put it in there, but I will not. I've resisted the urge, and I feel like I'm fairly good at seeking out those moments and making sure that I get them when I need them. But it could be the case that I actually need like 10 times as much as I get, and so I think after hearing you describe your experience, I think I'll probably try it out.
I mean, the other argument in the book is like, if you do, so it prescribes that you take 30 days to do this cleanse where you eliminate all technology, or not all technology, but all like not super necessary technology, anything frivolous. And then even if it makes your life like a little bit harder in certain vectors, so for instance, I've not been using Messenger as much, and that makes it hard to coordinate with you because we usually communicate via Messenger. So you might message me and then I don't get back to you until like many hours later because I've set a rule where I can only check it within like a certain time span in the evenings. Well, I haven't totally followed that cleanse, but the idea is you remove these things from your life for 30 days, and at the end of those 30 days, if there's anything that you like truly miss, or that you feel like it provides a net benefit to your life, then you can introduce them back in. But then for most people, you'll just kind of get used to not having the things that you didn't actually need, and then you don't even feel the need to add them back in. So for instance, for me right now, which I guess possibly to the detriment of this podcast in particular, I don't really feel a super strong need to go back to Twitter, because that's probably the biggest thing that I've like not missed. I may end up going back honestly like just for the podcast, or like maybe I'll just click on links that you send me or something.
Luckily I already hate Twitter. It already feels like work just scrolling through that bullshit. So I don't think I'm in too much danger.
Yeah. I mean, I will need some, like, a better source of news, I suppose. And I do have these, like, daily digest things I get, but I haven't been in the habit of checking those quite as much. So I don't have a replacement for Twitter yet.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think that that logic is really, really sound, because even if you're pretty confident that all the different ways you interact with Facebook or Twitter or Reddit, you've, like, calibrated to be just the right level for you, I mean, it's not that big of a risk to lose those things for a month, and at the end you can just add them back in. Yeah. And the worst case scenario is that you've been so, like, you know, psychically vampired or whatever, that you can't even sense that anymore, because, you know, just become so accustomed to these things in your life that they're actually controlling you in ways that you don't notice. Then a month of that might make you really realize, oh shit, I can't even spend a night alone with myself without checking Twitter.
Yeah.
I think there's way more people in that situation than really realize it. And I mean, it's not, at least for me, it's been not that hard to notice. Like, in my moments of minimalism, I kind of look around and see people just spending hours on their phones. Or like my girlfriend, I'll come home and then, you know, we'll say hi to each other and maybe we'll eat dinner or something. And then at 8 p.m., she plugs into Skyrim, and then now she's just gone for hours and I can't interact with her anymore. And I can't go and play my own video games, which is what I used to do, because I uninstalled them. Yeah. So now I'm just like, shit, why aren't you interacting with me? Like, I'm your boyfriend. Like, stop, get off your damn Switch. Yeah. But of course, that's what I've been doing for 2 years. So yeah. I don't know. Now I'm starting to feel like a weird, crazy person that is like seeing all these things that nobody else can see or something. Yeah. But I think everyone has this inkling, right? Everyone kind of feels like they are too online. Yeah. But I think this is something that we're going to have to, like, we have to figure this out culturally. Yeah. And one of the ways that you can do it is doing something like this cleanse. And I think I would definitely recommend this book to anybody who's, you know, interested in this sort of topic.
Okay. Well,
the other stuff I was going to talk about is suicide, but maybe we're not going to get...
Yeah, let's digitally cleanse this podcast. And...
Yeah, if you're listening to this podcast, you definitely should cut it out if you're doing a
just
cleanse.
turn it off right now. No, turn it off in like 2 minutes after we're done with the outro.
Yeah.
And just spend a few minutes in your own head and just observe your own thoughts and just let yourself space out a little bit. And you'll be surprised with some of the things that you might come up with.
I think being comfortable with boredom is the biggest thing. And that's like my personal challenge. Waiting out my boredom by like 20 seconds
Yeah.
and not making myself click on something.
That's been my biggest challenge when trying to re-listen to our podcast episodes.
All right, that's enough masochism for one episode. Let's cut it here.
All right, follow us on Twitter. Do the social media stuff. Rate us on iTunes if you want.
Oh, that's a new one.
Tell your friends.
Has anybody rated us on iTunes?
I don't think so.
Oh shit! Yeah, totally rate us on iTunes, and then uninstall iTunes.
If you want to get in contact with us, we have an email. I might put it in the description this time. It's grokkingpoints@gmail.com.
I don't know if I can remember that.
Yeah, it's hard. It's a hard one. Okay, outro.
Now we can go out and enjoy this beautiful day, aka stay inside and watch Twitch.
Oh yeah.